Have you ever wondered why the people God uses the most often endure the deepest pain? Why the very souls chosen to shine seem to walk through the darkest valleys first? It almost feels unfair. Those who pray the hardest, love the deepest, and believe the strongest often face storms that threaten to destroy them. But what if that breaking is not a punishment, but a preparation? What if the suffering you curse today is the tool God uses to carve out the strength He'll need to build something extraordinary within you? God never uses a man greatly until He has broken him deeply. It is in the breaking that pride dies, illusions fall away, and the heart becomes soft enough for His hands to shape. A man who has never been broken will always believe that his strength is his own. He will think his wisdom is enough, his plans are perfect, and his will should prevail. But a broken man? He learns the sacred truth that strength without surrender is rebellion, and purpose without humility is empty noise. When God wants to use a man, He does not send him comfort first. He sends him conflict. He does not give him applause. He gives him silence. He takes away the things that made him feel secure, the people who once believed in him, and the paths that once seemed clear. It is not cruelty. It is the divine surgery of the soul. Because God knows that no man can carry the weight of divine purpose on the shoulders of pride. To be filled, one must first be emptied. To lead, one must first learn to follow. To speak with power, one must first learn to listen in pain. The breaking is not the end, it is the beginning of transformation. When God breaks a man, He is not destroying him. He is dismantling everything that cannot stand in His presence. The ego that shouts, the ambition that blinds, the anger that poisons, all must fall apart, and when they do, something sacred happens. The man begins to see himself for what he truly is, dust in the hands of eternity, loved beyond measure, yet utterly dependent on grace. Think of a seed buried in darkness. It must crack open before life can begin. If it resists the breaking, it will rot where it lies. But if it surrenders, the split becomes the passage through which new life emerges. So it is with the soul. Every breaking in your life is a spiritual germination, a doorway through which the old you dies and the true you is born. The pain you feel is not the evidence of God's absence, but the sign of His intimate work within you. Many pray, God, use me, but few are ready for the process that follows, because when God answers that prayer, He begins to remove everything that stands between who you are and who He needs you to be. He will strip away your illusions of control, expose the fears you've hidden, and confront the wounds you've buried. He will let people misunderstand you, let doors close, let seasons end. Not because He has abandoned you, but because He is preparing you to depend on nothing but Him. Only then can you walk in the power that does not crumble under pressure. God cannot pour new wine into old wineskins. The breaking is His way of making room for something divine. When He shatters the vessel of your pride, He creates space for humility, wisdom, and compassion to dwell. You begin to see the world differently, not through the lens of ambition, but through the eyes of grace. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start whispering, "Use me." You stop chasing validation and begin seeking truth. You stop fighting His process and begin trusting His timing. The men and women God has used most in history were not those who had it easy, but those who allowed the breaking to purify them. Every prophet, every saint, every reformer walked through a season of silence where God seemed distant but was actually closest. Their tears watered the soil of their destiny. Their pain became the oil that anointed them. The loneliness you feel now may be the womb of your calling. The rejection you face may be the divine isolation that teaches you to hear His voice above all others. And when the breaking is complete, When you have stopped clinging to what you were, God will rebuild you, but not as before. You will rise quieter, humbler, stronger. You will speak with authority born not of pride, but of scars. You will walk with a wisdom that cannot be learned from books or applause. You will love deeper because you have known loss, and you will serve truer because you no longer need recognition. So when life feels unbearable and your spirit feels crushed, do not despair. You are not being destroyed, you are being refined. The breaking is the proof that God has chosen you for something greater. He is not removing your strength, He is teaching you where true strength begins. You are being emptied so He can fill you. You are being stripped so He can clothe you with purpose. You are being broken so His glory can flow through every crack of your being. The man God wants to use must first learn to kneel. The vessel He wants to fill must first be emptied. The soul He wants to raise must first be buried. And when that process is done, when the breaking has done its sacred work, you will understand that it was never to hurt you. It was always to prepare you. For in the hands of God the broken are never wasted. They are reborn. When God begins to break a man, it often feels like everything is falling apart. The plans that once made sense begin to crumble. The people who once supported him slowly disappear. The doors that once opened with ease suddenly refuse to move. He looks around and wonders, what did I do wrong? But what if he did nothing wrong at all? What if this breaking is not the evidence of God's displeasure, but of His intention to use him? God's breaking is not punishment. It is preparation. It is the divine process through which He removes what is weak, false, or prideful, and replaces it with what is true, strong, and eternal. When a man asks God to use him, he rarely understands what that request truly means. To be used by God is not to live in comfort. It is to be refined in fire. God cannot place heavy purpose on untested shoulders. He must first strip away every layer of self-dependence that keeps a man from fully trusting Him. That's why the breaking often begins with loss. God removes the very things that once gave the man confidence, his success, his position, his relationships, his control, so that he may learn that his identity is not built on what he has, but on who God is. Only when everything external has been shaken does the man realize that the foundation must be spiritual, not circumstantial. Consider the potter and the clay. The clay has no shape of its own. It cannot decide what it wants to become. It must first be pressed, stretched, and sometimes crushed back into a lump before the potter begins again. Each time the potter breaks it, the clay becomes more pliable, more sensitive to the potter's touch. So it is with the soul. The breaking makes the man teachable. It breaks the stubbornness that resists divine instruction. It teaches him that submission is not weakness, it is wisdom. God cannot pour His Spirit into a vessel that refuses to yield. Pain becomes the tool through which understanding grows. There are lessons that no sermon can teach, lessons that can only be learned in the wilderness of hardship. In that place the man learns to pray not for comfort, but for clarity. He learns to trust, not in outcomes, but in obedience. The breaking is not random, it is intentional. Every crack in the heart, every tear in the spirit, every unanswered prayer is carefully designed to prepare him for something greater. A man who has never been broken often confuses ambition for purpose. He chases after success thinking it will bring fulfillment. But God in His mercy allows those pursuits to fail, not to shame him, but to awaken him. For it is only when he loses what he thought he needed that he realizes what he truly needs is God. The breaking reveals priorities. It exposes idols. It brings the soul face to face with truth. And though it feels like destruction, It is actually construction from the inside out. During this process, heaven seems silent. The man prays and the answers don't come. He searches for signs and nothing moves. Yet in this silence, God is speaking the loudest. He is building faith that does not depend on visible results. He is teaching endurance, patience, and spiritual vision, the ability to see purpose beyond pain. Those who are not broken often rely on their own strength, but those who have been broken understand that strength alone is not enough. They move differently. They speak with gentleness. They lead with compassion. They serve without needing recognition, because they know the cost of becoming who they are. Look at any man or woman in history whom God has used in extraordinary ways, and you will find a story marked by breaking. Before the calling came the crushing. Before the anointing came the anguish. Before the wisdom came the wounds. It's a sacred pattern written into every life that has touched eternity. And though the world sees only the success, heaven remembers the struggle, because in that struggle the man was transformed. When the breaking ends, and it always does, the man is not the same. He emerges quieter but stronger, emptied of pride but full of purpose. The storms that once frightened him no longer hold the same power, for he has learned that nothing broken by God stays broken. The pieces are gathered and remade into something even more beautiful. The same hands that allowed the breaking now bring the healing. The same God who took everything away now returns it in a different form, refined, purified, and aligned with his will. So when you find yourself in a season where everything seems to fall apart, do not mistake it for punishment. God is not trying to destroy you. He is trying to reveal himself through you. The breaking is a sacred preparation for a divine assignment. You are not being buried, you are being planted. And when the time is right, what was once broken will bloom into something only God could create. Pride is the greatest obstacle to divine purpose. It builds invisible walls between a man and God, whispering that his achievements are his own doing, that his wisdom is enough, that his plans are flawless. Pride gives him the illusion of control, a fragile illusion that shatters the moment God begins his breaking work. You see, no man can truly serve God while still serving himself. Pride and purpose cannot share the same vessel. That is why before God elevates a man, he humbles him. Before he gives him authority, he teaches him surrender. The death of pride is not humiliation, it is liberation. It is the moment when a man stops striving to prove himself and starts allowing God to define him. When God begins to remove pride, he does not do it gently. He uses circumstances that pierce the ego and expose the heart. The man who once relied on his reputation may find it questioned. The one who took pride in his success may see it crumble. The one who felt secure in his relationships may suddenly find himself alone. Each loss cuts deeply because pride clings tightly to what feeds it. But with every blow, God is freeing the man from dependence on approval, validation, and control. The breaking is not cruelty, it is surgery. God is cutting away the infection that keeps the soul sick. A proud man cannot hear God clearly. His own voice drowns out divine guidance. He prays, but his prayers are self-centered. He works, but his motives are self-serving. He speaks, but his words seek recognition. So God allows failure to humble him, silence to quiet him, and pain to awaken him. Only when the man's own voice grows faint does he begin to recognize the still, small voice of God. And that is where transformation begins. Pride makes a man loud. Brokenness makes him listen. Think of a great tree standing tall, proud of its strength. A storm comes and its branches snap, its trunk bends and its roots are tested. The smaller plants around it, low to the ground, survive because they know how to bow. The proud tree learns through pain what humility teaches freely, that to stand tall before God, one must first learn to bow. Pride refuses to bend, and that is why it must be broken. There is a beauty in humility that pride can never imitate. A humble man carries quiet strength. He no longer feels the need to be right all the time, to win every argument, or to prove his worth to anyone. He becomes calm in the presence of misunderstanding and patient in the face of rejection. Why? Because he no longer draws identity from how others see him, but from who God says he is. That shift is the very essence of divine transformation. When God breaks pride, he is not trying to humiliate the man. He is trying to set him free from the endless exhaustion of self. Pride says, I can handle it. Humility says, I can't, but God can. And that is the turning point. The proud man lives in fear of losing control, while the humble man finds peace in surrender. When a man finally accepts that he is not the source of his own strength, something miraculous happens. God's strength begins to flow through him. The same man who once relied on logic now relies on faith. The one who once pushed others aside now lifts them up. The one who once sought glory now gives it all back to God. The breaking of pride transforms not just his actions, but his very essence. God resists the proud because pride closes the door to grace. But he gives grace to the humble because humility creates space for the divine to dwell. When pride dies, wisdom enters. When self-sufficiency fades, dependence on God grows. And this dependence does not weaken a man, it anchors him. The storms that used to terrify him now teach him. The failures that once crushed him now refine him. The pain that once made him question God now draws him closer to him. So when you feel life humbling you, when your plans fail, when your voice is ignored, when you're misunderstood, don't rush to escape the moment. It may be that God is breaking your pride, not to shame you, but to prepare you for a level of purpose that requires humility to sustain. For every great calling demands a low posture. Every divine elevation requires a bowed knee. The man who has allowed pride to die within him becomes unstoppable, not because of his confidence, but because of his surrender. He moves with grace, speaks with gentleness, and leads with strength rooted in humility. His authority is not born from dominance, but from alignment with God's will. And in that alignment, he finds a power that cannot be shaken, a quiet, holy confidence that only comes when pride has fallen and purpose has risen. Pain is not an accident in God's plan. It is one of his most intentional tools. When God begins to mold a man for divine purpose, he rarely uses comfort as the medium. He uses pain. Because pain reaches depths that words cannot. It dismantles illusions, it humbles arrogance, and it opens the heart in a way nothing else can. Pain has a way of silencing the noise of the world, so that the soul can finally hear what heaven is trying to say. Many people pray, God, use me, without realizing that being used by God means being refined by fire. Every man called to do something extraordinary must first walk through something excruciating. That is how heaven separates the genuine from the superficial. There are certain lessons that cannot be taught through blessings. They can only be learned through breaking. Pain strips away everything unnecessary. It reveals the motives behind your actions, the weakness behind your strength, and the limits of your self-reliance. In the beginning, a man resists it. He prays for the pain to end. He questions God's goodness. But with time, he begins to realize that the pain is not punishment. It's preparation. God is not angry with him. He is investing in him. The suffering he endures becomes the very ground where his wisdom will grow. Think of gold placed in the furnace. The fire is not there to destroy the gold, it's there to purify it. The heat exposes what is hidden, the impurities, the things that don't belong, the elements that make it less valuable. Only when those are burned away does the gold shine with full brilliance. That's exactly what God does with pain. He doesn't send it to break you beyond repair. He allows it to burn away the pride, fear, and self-importance that cloud your true purpose. When you walk through the fire, you don't come out the same. You come out refined, resilient, and radiant. In those moments of suffering, prayer takes on a different tone. It stops being a list of requests and becomes a cry for understanding. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start whispering, "What are you teaching me?" That is the shift God desires. Pain redirects focus from the external to the internal. It makes you look inward, to confront your weaknesses, to recognize your patterns, to rediscover your dependence on divine strength. And as you do, the pain that once felt meaningless begins to reveal its message. I am not here to destroy you. I am here to shape you. Every man God has ever used had to learn through suffering. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness learning obedience. Joseph was betrayed, imprisoned, and forgotten before he ruled in power. David fled from Saul before wearing the crown. The process was painful, but it was also necessary. Without pain, their character would not have been strong enough to carry their calling. And the same is true for every one of us. God allows us to walk through trials not because He delights in our tears, but because He knows what's on the other side. The man who has never suffered deeply cannot speak deeply. He may have knowledge, but he lacks empathy. Pain gives birth to compassion. It opens the eyes of the heart. Sometimes the pain God allows seems unfair. You lose what you thought you couldn't live without. You're betrayed by those you trusted. You watch dreams collapse, and you stand in the ruins wondering where God is. Yet in that desolate place, something sacred begins to happen. You start to hear Him differently, not through thunder but through whispers, not through success but through surrender. And that voice, gentle yet powerful, reminds you that He is not absent in the storm. He is working through it. The pain you despise today is the soil in which your purpose will grow tomorrow. It's often in pain that faith is proven real. Anyone can praise God when life is easy, but to trust Him while everything is falling apart, that's the kind of faith that moves heaven. Pain teaches endurance. It strengthens spiritual muscles that comfort never could. It builds a patience that waits, a resilience that rises, and a peace that cannot be shaken by circumstances. When the man finally emerges from that season, he doesn't carry bitterness. He carries wisdom. He no longer asks God to remove every hardship. He asks for the strength to walk through them with grace. And in the end, pain becomes sacred. The very thing that once made him question God becomes the thing that makes him depend on God. What once felt like destruction turns out to be construction of the soul. He realizes that God didn't send pain to ruin his life, but to rebuild it on a foundation that cannot crumble. He understands that no amount of comfort could have produced the clarity and humility that pain brought him. The scars remain, but they are no longer signs of defeat. They are marks of transformation. They tell the story of a man who met God in the fire and came out changed forever. When God sets His eyes on a man He intends to use, one of the first things He does is pull him away from the noise of the crowd. It is in isolation that divine training begins. Many confuse isolation with abandonment, but they are not the same. Abandonment wounds, but isolation refines. God doesn't isolate you to punish you. He isolates you to prepare you. The world teaches men to stay surrounded, to seek approval, to measure worth through applause, but God teaches the opposite. He leads his chosen into quiet places, away from the comfort of familiarity, so they can hear his voice without interference. Every great destiny begins in hiddenness. Every divine assignment is born in silence. It's often in the seasons of isolation that questions arise. Why am I alone? Why did they leave? Why did the doors close? You may not see it at the time, but that loneliness is divine protection. God removes certain people from your path not because they are evil, but because their presence would limit your growth. There are voices you can't afford to listen to when God is shaping your soul. He takes you away from distractions to build discernment. He hides you from visibility to build vision. The isolation is not rejection, it is incubation. Something sacred is forming in the silence. In the wilderness of solitude, the man begins to see his own heart clearly. When no one is around to praise or criticize him, he is forced to confront who he truly is, without titles, without masks, without validation. It's uncomfortable at first. The quiet feels heavy. The absence of applause feels like failure. But in time, he begins to notice something else: God's presence in the stillness. What once felt like emptiness begins to feel like encounter. The silence becomes the sanctuary. The stillness becomes strength. He learns to stop begging for company and starts craving communion with God. Isolation also reveals the motives of the heart. In the crowd, it's easy to perform faith. In solitude, faith must become real. When no one is watching, the man learns to pray sincerely, to seek God not for rewards but for relationship. He begins to discover the difference between public spirituality and private intimacy. And that private intimacy is what gives birth to real power. The man who has learned to walk with God alone will never be swayed by the opinions of others when he stands before them. Isolation teaches him that approval is temporary, but divine alignment is eternal. Every great calling in history has gone through the valley of isolation. Moses spent 40 years in the desert, tending sheep before God called him to lead a nation. Elijah sat alone by a brook while God fed him with ravens. David was left forgotten in fields before he was anointed king. Even those moments that felt like exile were actually seasons of preparation. The hidden years are never wasted. They are the forge where character is shaped. When God isolates a man, he is not removing him from purpose. He is refining him for it. In the quiet of isolation, faith grows without proof. The man learns to depend on unseen promises. He learns that God's silence is not absence, it's strategy. Silence teaches spiritual maturity. It forces the soul to trust beyond emotion, to rely on the unseen hand guiding every unseen detail. And while the world moves fast, chasing noise and validation, the man in isolation moves inward, building roots that will one day sustain branches. He realizes that while others chase recognition, he is being prepared for revelation. There comes a point in this solitude when the pain of loneliness transforms into the peace of presence. The man begins to understand that being hidden is a blessing. He starts to see that God doesn't reveal his treasures in crowded places. He reveals them in caves, in deserts, in midnights where no one else is watching. That's where destiny is shaped. That's where dependence is born. When you have walked through a season where only God was with you, you stop fearing abandonment because you've met the one who never leaves. Then, when the time is right, God brings the man back into the world. But he is not the same. The noise that once distracted him no longer has power. The opinions that once swayed him no longer matter. The solitude has made him solid. The rejection has made him resilient. The silence has taught him to listen. And now, when he speaks, his words carry weight. When he acts, his actions are guided by divine wisdom. When he leads with grace instead of pride. That's the power of isolation. It turns a man from being influenced by the world into a man who can influence it. So, if you find yourself alone, if doors have closed and people have disappeared, do not despair. You are not forgotten. You are in the sacred classroom of solitude, where God trains his most trusted servants. Let the silence teach you. Let the stillness strengthen you. Let the isolation deepen your roots. Because when God isolates you, he's not keeping you from the world. He's preparing you to change it. When a man has been broken by God, something extraordinary happens within him. His heart becomes deeper, softer, and more aware of others' pain. Brokenness creates a compassion that cannot be learned from comfort. It gives birth to a gentleness that only suffering can teach. Before a man is broken, he may see the pain of others, but not feel it. After he's been broken, he carries it with them. His spirit recognizes the ache in another soul because he has walked through his own valley of tears. Brokenness does not make him weaker, it makes him human in the most divine way. It strips away judgment and replaces it with understanding. It takes away pride and replaces it with mercy. The unbroken man speaks from theory. The broken man speaks from truth. There's a difference between knowing about pain and knowing pain. The first gives advice, the second gives comfort. The first talks, the second listens. God allows brokenness because he knows that those who will one day lift others must first know how it feels to fall. Only those who have been healed can truly help heal others. When a man has walked through darkness and found light again, he becomes a light for those still lost in their night. His compassion is not pity, it is empathy born from experience. When a man is broken, he learns to see the world not as a battlefield of competition, but as a field of souls. He no longer needs to prove himself. He now seeks to uplift others. His words no longer carry arrogance, they carry grace. He understands the quiet struggles behind smiling faces. He notices the tremor in someone's voice, the exhaustion behind their laughter. Because pain has trained his perception, his eyes now see beyond appearances. Where he once judged, he now intercedes. Where he once turned away, he now steps forward. Brokenness teaches the soul to love as God loves, without conditions, without pride, and without limits. Pain humbles in ways success never can. It reminds the man of his dependence on God and his shared fragility with others. He no longer stands above people in pride, he stands beside them in compassion. He no longer points fingers, he extends hands. The same man who once thought strength was dominance now understands that true strength is kindness. The world glorifies toughness, but heaven values tenderness. God breaks a man not to harden him, but to make him tender enough to carry divine love without corruption. There is also a quiet power that comes with compassion. The man who has suffered deeply carries an authority of peace. He doesn't need to shout to be heard. His calm presence speaks louder than noise. When others panic, he remains still, because he knows what it feels like to be broken, and he knows that even broken things can be rebuilt. His calm becomes contagious. His faith becomes visible, and others, seeing that stability, find hope again. That is how God uses the broken. He turns their wounds into testimonies, their scars into strength, their past pain into present purpose. It's easy to love people when life is good, but when you've suffered, you love differently. You forgive faster because you know how much forgiveness heals. You judge slower because you understand how fragile the human heart is. You give more freely because you know what it feels like to have nothing left but faith. Compassion becomes second nature. It flows from the cracks God has opened in your soul. The very tears that once fell in despair now water the seeds of empathy. Every wound becomes a window for divine love to shine through. Brokenness creates depth. The man who has suffered no longer speaks from the surface, he speaks from the soul. His prayers are deeper, his worship more sincere, his gratitude more grounded. He finds beauty in simplicity, meaning in struggle, and joy in presence. He no longer chases perfection because he has learned that God works through imperfection. Every scar on his heart becomes proof that pain can be transformed into purpose. That is the paradox of brokenness. It leaves you cracked but not crushed, wounded but wiser, emptied yet overflowing with grace. And so, when God uses a broken man, the world feels it. His words heal, his silence comforts, his presence restores faith. People see in him a reflection of God's mercy, a reminder that no one is too shattered to be used, no one too damaged to be loved. His compassion is not weakness, it is divine strength made visible. For it is through the broken that God shows the beauty of restoration. The man who once cried out in the dark now becomes a voice of light. His pain, redeemed by love, becomes the greatest tool in God's hands. True power is not found in control, pride, or domination. It is born in surrender. When a man stops fighting the process God has placed him in and begins to yield, that's when something sacred begins to unfold. The world teaches that surrender is weakness, but heaven defines it as wisdom. Because surrender is not giving up, it's giving over. It's the moment when a man lays down the weapons of self-will and allows divine will to take command. Only then does he experience the quiet, steady strength that comes from being aligned with something greater than himself. Before surrender, life feels like resistance. Every trial becomes a battle. Every delay feels like an obstacle. The man tries to force outcomes, manipulate timing, and bend circumstances to his own plan. But the more he struggles, the heavier everything becomes. His spirit grows weary, his prayers lose focus, and peace becomes distant. That's when God whispers, not in anger, but in love, be still. The moment the man stops fighting, a new power enters, the power of rest, the power of trust, the power of knowing that the one who made the storm also controls it. Surrender does not mean inaction. It means inner alignment. It means letting go of anxiety while still doing what's right. It means taking steps in faith without demanding to see the whole path. A surrendered man works, but without obsession. He plans, but without fear. He gives his best, but leaves the outcome to God. That shift changes everything. What used to drain him now strengthens him. He begins to realize that power was never about control. It was about connection. The closer he walks with God, the stronger he becomes, even in weakness. When God breaks a man, it's not just to humble him. It's to teach him how to flow with divine timing, and divine timing cannot be forced. It can only be followed. The man who surrenders learns the rhythm of heaven, when to move, when to wait, when to speak, and when to stay silent. He begins to discern that not every closed door is rejection. Sometimes it's protection. Not every delay is denial. Sometimes it's preparation. This is a common law, and its presence is destiny. This wisdom can only come from surrender. Because surrender teaches you to trust what you cannot yet understand. Think of a river. The water never resists the shape of the land. It flows around every rock and through every valley, yet nothing stops it. Its strength is in its surrender. It bends, but it never breaks. It yields, but it never quits. That is what a surrendered soul looks like. God doesn't want to make the man rigid. He wants to make him fluid, strong enough to endure, soft enough to obey. When the man learns to flow with the divine current instead of swimming against it, he discovers that progress comes not from pushing harder, but from trusting deeper. Surrender also changes how a man sees his trials. Instead of asking, "Why me?" he begins to ask, "What for?" Instead of begging for escape, he seeks understanding. He realizes that each challenge is an invitation to grow, not a punishment to endure. And in that shift, pain loses its power. The fire still burns, but it no longer destroys. It purifies. The mountain still stands tall, but it no longer intimidates. It teaches endurance. When a man surrenders, everything that once worked against him begins to work for him. Even what was meant for evil starts turning toward good, because God's hand is in control. A surrendered man walks differently. There's a calmness about him that the world can't explain. He doesn't rush, yet he's never late. He doesn't boast, yet his presence carries authority. He doesn't fear loss, because he knows who holds his life. That quiet confidence is the fruit of surrender. It's not arrogance, it's assurance. It's the peace that comes when your will no longer wrestles with God's will. It's knowing that even if everything collapses, the one who rebuilt the universe can rebuild your life too. And here lies the divine paradox. The moment a man gives up trying to control everything, he gains control over himself. The moment he lets go of the need to win, he begins to walk in victory, because true power was never about dominance, it was about dependence. The man who surrenders does not lose strength, he gains supernatural strength. His confidence no longer depends on what he can do, but on what God can do through him. And once he reaches that place, there is no battle that can break him, no storm that can shake him, and no fear that can enslave him. This is why surrender is the birthplace of divine power. It's where striving ends and strength begins. It's where the human will bows and heaven moves. The man who has learned to surrender doesn't just survive, he transforms. He becomes a vessel through which peace flows, faith breathes, and purpose moves. And the world, seeing his calm in chaos, realizes that what they once called weakness is actually the highest form of strength, the power that only comes when a man has finally surrendered his will to God's. After the breaking comes the rebuilding. But what God rebuilds is never the same as what was lost. It is better, purer, and stronger. When a man has been fully broken, emptied of pride, stripped of control, and remade in surrender, God begins his divine reconstruction. He does not simply repair the fragments of what once was. He crafts something new from the ruins. The man who once depended on his strength now walks with wisdom. The one who once chased success now seeks purpose. The one who once spoke loudly now speaks with weight. Rebuilding is not restoration of the old, it is resurrection of something transformed. When God rebuilds, he starts from the inside. Before blessings return, character is refined. Before opportunities open, motives are purified. Before the man is trusted with influence, he is tested in integrity. God will never place divine power in unprepared hands. So the rebuilding process begins quietly, almost unseen. The man starts to think differently, speak differently, love differently. He no longer reacts from emotion, he responds from understanding. The same trials that once broke him now remind him of how far he has come. His scars no longer define him, they testify to the work of grace within him. The rebuilding is patient, It's not rushed, because God builds for endurance, not applause. He is not interested in temporary success, but in eternal strength. So he takes his time, placing every piece carefully, weaving every detail with purpose. The man may not see progress at first, but something deep within him begins to awaken. Peace, once foreign, now becomes familiar. Faith, once fragile, now stands firm. Hope, once distant, now lives close. God rebuilds not just the man's life, but his heart, his vision, and his reason for living. What makes the rebuilt man different is his perspective. He no longer sees loss as failure, he sees it as foundation. He no longer fears endings, he recognizes them as beginnings in disguise. The pain that once haunted him now humbles him. The struggles that once confused him now clarify his calling. He understands that everything God took was never meant to punish him. It was meant to prepare him for what was coming next. The new version of himself could not exist without the death of the old one. A rebuilt man carries quiet authority. He doesn't need to announce who he is or what he's been through. People can feel it. His words carry weight because they've been tested in fire. His calmness draws others because it was earned through storms. His wisdom comforts because it was born through wounds. He becomes a living testimony that God does not waste pain. The very things that broke him now bless others. The very nights that shattered him now strengthen someone else's faith. That is the beauty of divine rebuilding. What once felt like ruin becomes revelation. When God restores, he multiplies. He doesn't give back what was lost. He gives back more than what was taken, but that more is not always material. It's spiritual depth, emotional maturity, unshakable faith. The man's new strength doesn't come from wealth, status, or recognition. It comes from knowing that even if everything falls apart again, he will rise again, because he knows who holds him. His confidence no longer depends on circumstances, it rests on character. He no longer prays for ease, but for endurance. He no longer fears the unknown, because he's seen God work wonders in the impossible. And when the man steps back into the world, he moves differently. His success no longer needs validation. It has purpose. His leadership no longer seeks control. It seeks service. His heart no longer longs for approval. It longs for alignment with divine will. People who once doubted him now see something sacred in his peace. He doesn't speak of revenge or regret. He speaks of redemption. His life itself becomes a sermon, living proof that what God breaks, he rebuilds better. So when you see the ruins of your life and wonder if they can ever rise again, remember this: God never leaves his work unfinished. If he allowed the breaking, it's because he plans to rebuild, but this time he will build on the rock of humility, faith, and wisdom, not on the sand of pride and self-will. You may have been broken, but you are not abandoned. The same hands that crushed the old are now crafting the new. Every scar will one day shine as evidence of his grace. Every tear will become part of your testimony. And when you stand rebuilt, you'll understand that God never took anything from you that he didn't plan to replace with something far greater. And so when you look back on the journey, the breaking, the silence, the pain, the surrender, you begin to see the divine pattern that was always there. What once felt like punishment now looks like preparation. What seemed like loss was in truth the pruning of everything that could not carry your destiny. God does not break to destroy. He breaks to rebuild. He allows the storm not to sink you, but to strip away what was never meant to last. What never meant to storm, not to sink you, but to strip away what was never meant to last. And in that breaking, he births something indestructible within you. Character, depth, faith, and purpose. The man God uses is never the same as the man he was before the breaking. His words carry the echo of heaven, his strength bears the mark of surrender, and his heart moves with compassion that can only come from divine refinement. He no longer walks by sight, because he has learned to trust what he cannot see. He no longer fights for recognition, because he has found peace in being unseen by the world, but fully known by God. So if you find yourself in the middle of the breaking, hold on. You are not being buried. You are being planted. The soil may be dark, the pressure heavy, the silence deafening, but beneath it all, life is forming. God is preparing you to bloom in a way that will glorify Him and heal others. Every crack in your soul is a doorway for His light to enter. Every tear you shed has watered the roots of your future. When the time comes, you will rise, not as you once were, but as the man God always intended you to be, stronger, humbler, wiser, and filled with divine purpose. And then, when you stand upon the foundation built from your own ashes, you'll finally understand. The breaking was never meant to end you. It was meant to begin you.